The subject of, or the topic of our study this week is practices for troubled times, and there's no need to list the troubles of these times. We all know it, we're all experiencing it. And no matter how much we've endured, some people have had it easier than others, but no matter how bad it's been for us, we can also know for certain that for others, it has been much worse. And that's just the human realm. And it's just the nature of being human, really. If we expand our mind to see the realities of all of cyclic existence and the multiple realms of existence, we see that everything from gross, terrible suffering to mild unsatisfactoriness is pretty much the way things are. We have a moment of pleasure here, a moment of happiness there. Sometimes it lasts a little while. Yet the cycle of recurring problems, recurring pandemics, recurring political upheavals, injustice for all beings, comes and comes and comes and comes, and then we're born, and then we die, and we go through another life, we go through it again, we have another life, and we go through it again, and then we're in another realm, and the suffering is greater. We're in another realm, the suffering is a little less. Yet the cycle of recurring problems goes on and on and on. And we share this with all the people around us. They have the same experiences. They have the same longing for happiness that we do, and the same wish to be away from any kind of discomfort, suffering. We're all in it together, really and truly. It's not a cliche. And right now, in our somewhat privileged position, we have to admit, we can look around and see that there isn't much we can do to help. We can offer food to the food bank. Lots of people are going to work on the front lines, and that helps a lot. But for the long term, nothing lasting, really. But the fortune that we've had to be able to meet the Buddha's teachings, to be able to meet the possibility of getting out of cyclic existence altogether. Not just us, but actually developing the skill based on wisdom, based on the compassion that drove us to develop that ultimate wisdom, based on the bodhicitta, our aspiration to become Buddha, in order to really help living beings, really help them, meaning getting out of this cycle altogether. We have the opportunity to do that in this life right now. And that is amazing. No matter what else we're experiencing, that we have that, very precious. And so let's use this time this morning, and this day, and this week, and then our whole lives, committed to cultivating the qualities that, if it's possible, then we have to check. But if we have an inkling that it's possible, to overcome our own afflictions, overcome our karma, develop all of our good qualities, get ourselves out of cyclic existence, and to bring everybody with us, then let's do it. And may our study today create the causes for us to be able to do it as quickly as possible. Okay, so here we are back with Togme Sangpo and his beautiful, amazing, challenging poem, 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas. And so we've seen how the truckload of dung dumped at our doorstep is something we have to deal with, something we do have responsibility for. And today, the verses that we're going to look at show us that buried in the truckload of dung are a ton of landmines. And so we go deeper in how we're going to deal with that. So just to review a little bit, on Sunday, Venerable Damcho took us to recognizing our precious human life and how to use it. We looked at the poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. We looked at death and, relying on a spiritual friend, those kinds of topics. Yesterday, Venerable Semke took us the next step, where we looked at two really important topics, among other things that we'll look, but two that are important for our teaching today. One is looking at karma and its role in our lives, its role in creating our lives, etc. And also generating love, compassion, and bodhicitta, shifting from the self-centered thought to cherishing others. And that's the foundation of this next section of verses. In Venerable Children's book, she subtitles this Transforming Distressing Events and Dealing with Difficulties. 37 practices for troubled times. This is the how-to. Because, we're living in troubled times. As I said, nobody needs to enumerate those. So this section begins a whole group of teachings based on Lojong, the thought training teachings. The whole poem is, but this one really, this set of verses really focuses on this. It's a genre of teachings that especially was developed in Tibet and is treasured as the supreme practice for overcoming the self-centered thought and learning to cherish others. So it's said this group of teachings came to Tibet with Lama Atisha, 10th or 11th century, so about 1,000 years they've been cultivated for the Tibetans over a period of time. Very influential in Tibetan Buddhism. I would say experiencing this teaching in the body of a person is actually what brought me to the Dharma, I will say. In about 1995, I had friends who were studying with Venerable Tubchen Chödrön. I was not. I thought Buddhism was about breathing, which I knew how to do. Thank you very much. But someone, somehow or another, a Tibetan monk, Palden Gyatso, was traveling through Canada and North America and had been invited to teach at where Venerable Chödrön had the Dharma Friendship Foundation before they even had their own space. She was living in a little house in Wallingford in Seattle, and the Dharma Center was in her living room. And Palden Gyatso was giving a talk at some awful hour of the morning, 6:30 or 7, partly because that's the only time he had, and people were able to come and before they went to work. So Palden Gyatso, I didn't know the background before I went to see him, but he was arrested for protesting during the Chinese invasion of Tibet so that would have been 1959, 1960, somewhere right in there. He spent 33 years in Chinese prison labor camps. He was extensively tortured. He suffered tremendously. He has the distinction of serving the longest of any of the Tibetan political prisoners in the Chinese communist camps. So he was released in 1992. I don't know why, I don't know the conditions of it, but the Tibetan underground smuggled him out of Tibet, got him to Dharamsala, and their mission to him was to tell the world about his experiences in the Tibetan Gulag, and he did. So he testified before the UN, he testified at all kinds of pro-Tibetan protests in the West. He wrote a book called Fire Under the Snow. And he happened to be passing through Seattle on this journey. And I don't even remember why I said, sure, I'll go, but I went. So I sat in that living room, small room, not near as big as this, maybe a third the size of this room. I sat in the front row on the floor. Don't even know if I had a cushion. Palden Gyatso maybe between here and me and Venerable Nima. So I'm guessing that's 12 feet. I don't know. But close. I don't remember who translated, but he began to speak. I mean, as we sat there, he just sat very quietly. He didn't speak English at all, so he sat very quietly and meditated until it was time for him to talk. And then when he began to speak, he opened his mouth and began to talk about the most incredible atrocities that I could imagine. He had with him the tools of the suffering that he had experienced, the torture that the Chinese communists had used to harass, interrogate. I don't even know what the purpose was, but to put down their Tibetan prisoners. The shock between what this man was saying, how he talked about these things, and I won't even describe them because I don't want to re-trigger anybody who might have had difficulties in their life, but they're horrible. Read the book. But he spoke with so much love. He wasn't holding up going, and then they did this. No, he silently just matter-of-factly said, this is what happened. This is what happened. Repeatedly said, I do not hate the Chinese. It wasn't just what he said. There was this feeling that I felt, ripples of love coming off this man. I was almost in tears just being in his presence. He was so peaceful, so loving. And as he spoke, I thought, if this practice can do that for a human being, I need to know what it is. It was a profound experience. And I think for me, Palden Gyatso is the embodiment of the power of these Lojong or thought training teachings. What happens when someone who is trained in transforming adversity into the path, trained in using their mind to reframe the situation so that they use even the most terrible situations to cultivate love and compassion, and what the power of that is. And Palden Gyatso, as far as I know, he may have been a bodhisattva by the time I met him, but he was an ordinary monk. He wasn't acclaimed as some great realized practitioner. He didn't have, nobody called him a reincarnate lama. He wasn't Rinpoche anybody. He was Palden Gyatso, the Tibetan monk. I assume he was as ordinary a being as you and I are when he started out. And after 33 years of torture and 33 years of thought training, he became an amazing, kind man. So that's what Venerable Tongme Sangpo is offering us here in this text. The spirit of Palden Gyatso, turning hatred into love. Oh, I wanted to tell you this quote too. I read an interview. Somebody asked him a question, was interviewing him about this, and they said the most striking aspect of his book is his lack of resentment towards his tormentors. How had he been able to avoid hating the Chinese? So this reporter asked the question, and Palden, he says, shook his head and said, I had not understood. This is what he said. It is not that I was without hatred. Especially when I was being tortured by my guards, I had immense hatred against them because I was being hurt. But as a religious person, after the event, I could reflect on what had happened. And I could see that those who inflicted torture did so out of their own experience. So again, it wasn't that he just had this naturally. He for sure reacted in the same way we would to pain, to harm, with anger, with hatred. But because of his training, afterwards, again and again and again, he had to reframe it, rethink it, and that's the result of growing his love and compassion. So that's what these verses do. So I'd like for us to read this section together because I want to take them somewhat as a whole. We're doing verses 12 through 19. Even if someone out of strong desire steals all your wealth or has it stolen, dedicate to him your body, possessions, and your virtue, past, present, and future. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Even if someone tries to cut off your head when you haven't done the slightest thing wrong, out of compassion, take all her misdeeds upon yourself. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Even if someone broadcasts all kinds of unpleasant remarks about you throughout the 3,000 worlds, in return, with a loving mind, speak of his good qualities. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Though someone may deride and speak bad words about you in a public gathering, looking on her as a spiritual teacher, bow to her with respect. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Even if a person for whom you've cared like your own child regards you as an enemy, cherish him specially, like a mother does her child who is stricken by sickness. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. If an equal or inferior person disparages you out of pride, place her as you would your spiritual teacher with respect on the crown of your head. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Though you lack what you need and are constantly disparaged, afflicted by dangerous sickness and spirits, without discouragement, take on the misdeeds and the pain of all living beings. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Though you become famous and many bow to you, and you gain riches equal to Vajravana's, see that worldly fortune is without essence and be unconceited. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So you can see that reading through these, he's suggesting that we do things that, if you think about it for superficially, you'll think that's nuts. This is insane. But that's the practice of Lojong. So Lojong means, it's Tibetan. It denotes, Lo is mind and thought or attitude. And the Jong part means training or cultivation, habituation, or purification. So training the mind, thought, training, mind, training. Mind habituation. Thupten Jinpa, who's has been the translator for His Holiness and really practices these, has translated a lot of the Lojong teachings. He says, broadly speaking, all the teachings of the Buddha can be characterized as mind training. I mean, that's what Buddha, transforming the ordinary mind overwhelmed by ignorance and afflictions into the mind of an awaking Buddha. That's mind training. This genre, long genre thought training, refers to a specific approach for cultivating the awakening mind, the mind of altruistic intention or bodhicitta, especially through the practice of equalizing and exchanging self and others. So that's what Venerable Semkhe took us through yesterday. The practice of developing bodhicitta through equalizing and exchanging ourselves with others, and culminating with the taking and giving meditation that she also talked us through. So this is kind of at the core, not kind of, this is at the core of the Lojong teachings. So thought training is very practical. And what it boils down to is changing how we interpret events. So it doesn't mean we're sugarcoating, it doesn't mean we're playing denial or anything like that. It means that we change our perspective. And when we change our perspective, we recognize that we can respond in a different way from the one that we are habituated to. So adversity comes in our life. It's hardly need to talk about it. I mean, for some, especially, it comes at the very beginning of our life. We have troubled childhoods. For some, it waits until we're older. But sooner or later, it comes to us all. It hangs around in different forms. Some people get adversity in lots of waves like this. It's a part of being in cyclic existence. And the normal reaction, I just want to normalize it. The normal reaction to adversity is anger or discouragement. It's true. But just because it's normal doesn't mean it's the only possibility. It's just the one that we're habituated to. So when we talk about thought training, we're also bringing in a different habit. Gradually, over time, that habit will replace the habit of responding with anger and with discouragement. And as Palden Gyatso said, as a religious person, after the event, I could reflect on what had happened. As spiritual practitioners, people who are clearly have an interest in transforming our mind, then this is important for us to know. It's part of our spiritual practice, then, to transform the adversity. Hence, at the end of this is the practice of Bodhisattvas. What Venerable Tome Sampo is telling us is that this is how the Bodhisattvas practice. This is how we practice to become Bodhisattvas as well. Bodhisattvas know there are difficulties in samsara. They are fully committed to liberating all of us. They know that developing bodhicitta combined with their wisdom is the ticket out, and that becoming Buddha is the best possible way of liberating beings. So they must use whatever arises, whatever. I mean, they have to, because mostly that's what's going to arise. And if you crumble, if we crumble, if they crumble, every time something heavy arises, then we won't ever get anywhere. So thought training is about that. So again, with these verses, that's why I wanted to take them as a whole. There are a few key principles that I think would be important to look at before we look at the verses one by one. Karma, which Venerable Semke introduced yesterday or talked about yesterday. The disadvantages of anger. And then patience or fortitude, which Venerable Nima led us through this morning. So just to touch on a few of these. Of course, I will say, this was my challenge in preparing this talk. I mean, we could do weeks and weeks on every one of these. Weeks and weeks and weeks on all these verses, so we'll just have to touch on them, but I want to emphasize certain things. So karma, that's one way to look at the adverse situation in order to transform it, is to use our understanding of karma, the law of cause and effect, or cause and result. If we firmly believe and understand that, and I don't have time to go into it much today, but I really recommend that people study it a lot. If we firmly believe and understand that our actions produce the corresponding results that we experience, then we will know that whatever experience arises, we created the cause for. This is not about blaming ourselves, but simply acknowledging somewhere, somehow, sometime, some person, an earlier version of the continuity of this present consciousness did something that is bringing this result. So if I'm criticized, well, hello. In the past, I have done the same. And in fact, if I look around, I've probably done it today. I'm creating more causes to be criticized in the future. So really? Is there a reason to be angry? So once we acknowledge that we create our own misery, and we can really, practice with recognizing that whatever arises is due to something similar we've done in the previous life, it's quite liberating. We take responsibility, and so when the difficulties arise, we can say, great, this karma's finishing. It's done. I rejoice. It's over. And if I've caught it and don't respond with anger, or don't retaliate, don't criticize back, then I'm not creating more causes in the future. That's really great. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But the practice, as we get more and more familiar with holding this view, this Buddhist worldview in our mind, then this is a basis, one of the bases for how we work with adverse circumstances in the Lojong teachings. The second point is we need to learn to deal with our anger. And as he said, we can say that anger is a natural response. So is discouragement when things come up. But it doesn't have to be the only response. The definition, or a definition, anger is an intention to harm beings, sentient beings, to harm suffering in our own continuum, or to harm phenomena that are sources of our sufferings. It's a short version. It has the function of causing us not to remain in contact with happiness and serves as a basis of misconduct. Now think about this. Anger has the function of causing us not to remain in contact with happiness. Is this true? Are we happy when we're angry? No, but that could be a strong motivating force then to not have it, although we're so used to it, sometimes I don't know I'm angry until I've opened my mouth. That's a sad admission to make even still, but I'm working on it. And it does serve as a basis for misconduct, because we're, if our happiness is thwarted, if we feel that we are being harmed, then our reflexive response is to retaliate or to run, one or the other. Though anger, this is continuing with the definition, through anger, one does not abide in happiness in this lifetime. True. And immeasurable suffering is induced in the future. So we have to train our minds to understand that getting angry doesn't help. We think it does. We think it's going to protect us. We think it's going to preserve our sense of self. It's going to protect our boundaries. It's going to help us remain who we are. It's going to show that other person that they can't do that to me, and I'll put them in their place, and then they'll never do it to me again. So we think it's going to protect us for the long term. We're not consciously thinking about this necessarily when we lash out, but that's what's going on. True? And does it work? No, that's what puzzles me so much. No, it never works. It only brings a rotten result, as far as I can tell. Does it keep coming up? Yes. Do I keep following it? Yes. Not to discourage those who are brand new, it is better. I think the people in the room can attest that there's been some improvement. I hope so. Anyway, I won't ask that question. Either way, okay, we have two choices when things happen. We can either stay upset, and we can carry that for a lifetime. Many of us do. We all know that. Or we can train our mind. And if we're able to do that, then things that would normally freak us out, the more we practice the Dharma, or the more we apply these teachings, the more stable and happy the mind remains. So I was going to bring Venerable Children's book up here to hold as an example, but Working with Anger is a guidebook I recommend for every single person. I think we'll put it on the resource page afterwards, now that I've said this. This will help tremendously to study that book and use it as a guide for life. But some of the disadvantages of anger we'll go through quickly, and then we'll meditate more on these. So in angry body and mind, we have no chance for happiness. So if we want to be happy, we don't want suffering, you'd think right there we'd get it, but no. It's part of our ignorance, right? Anger destroys relationships with friends, relatives, people we love. Anybody ever had that experience? Yeah. It is said that anger is one of the worst mental afflictions. Actually, Geshe Sopa is going to tell us it is the worst mental affliction, aside from the ignorance that it arises from. It's like a powerful fire that quickly engulfs and destroys a huge forest of trees, flowers, and shrubs. It says anger is not physically destructive, although actions done by anger can be powerfully physically destructive. But it does also impair the good potential in our mind stream. So the unseen, not so visible result of anger is that it prevents our merit from ripening. So that's how it prevents our happiness. Not just when it's manifest in our mind, but that it blocks the good karma from ripening. One moment of anger is so powerful it can destroy the virtues created over 1,000 eons. I've debated that a lot. I've asked that question a lot. Really? Really, one moment of anger over 1,000 eons? I get a lot of different answers. But the emphasis still is, as Geshe Sopa says, there is nothing more negative than hatred. Anger grows into hatred, right? It's a branch, it's a piece of it. He says the main result of powerful hatred can't be measured. Anger brings an almost incalculable number of terrible rebirths and many horrific misfortunes during those lives. It's bad for ourselves, it's bad for others, it's bad in the short term, it's bad in the long term, it's bad spiritually, and it's bad from a worldly perspective. Hatred, anger is the most destructive influence on past virtues and merits. Patience is the alternative. Patience or fortitude. So I want to emphasize here, okay, so we're all angry. We all have anger in our continuum. I can't say that we're all angry here right now. I hope we're not, but might be. But we do all have anger in our mind, the seeds of anger in our mind. So I'm not emphasizing this or laying these heavy things from Geshe Sopa to start making us feel bad because we have been angry, will be angry, are angry, that they come and go. It's because we're so accustomed to it, we really do tend to think it's our friend and protector. And that's where we have to unloosen how we view things. That's the beginning of it. Then as we examine the role of anger in our daily life and start to see that it doesn't help us, we can recognize that we're not completely a victim to it. We don't have to be. That there are methods, there are antidotes, there are ways to work with anger, and slowly, over time, we will change how we relate to things. And anger may or may not be so reflexive for us in certain situations. So that's the point here. It's not to make anybody feel bad because you've had moments of anger. We all have. So then cultivating patience is the groundwork for transforming that anger. It's a mental attitude that makes you able to bear hardship. If we practice patience all the time, they say, it brings immeasurable, wonderful qualities. Fortitude, patience, Venerable Chögyam translates it as fortitude. Most translations call it patience, and so we'll use fortitude as much as I can remember to do that. It's not the mere absence of hostility. So it's not just learning to bear sufferings without, lashing out. It is actually replacing it with a mind of love. When I first heard that part, I was shocked. What? Not just bearing it and not responding with anger, but actually responding with a mind of love. That's really developed patience, fortitude. The definition is, when referring to one of the three objects, meaning someone who harms us, the harm itself, or the cause of the harm, fortitude bears the characteristics of love and directly overcomes anger and hatred. It is the basis for the prevention of anger and the increase of love and compassion. So again, just following up what Venerable Nima led us this morning, there are three types, because there's three types of objects. So the first type of fortitude is the kind that we cultivate that doesn't retaliate when we are harmed. Physically, mentally, emotionally, actually, or projected. It's the mind that does not retaliate when we are harmed. The second type, transcending problems and pain with a positive attitude, is the way it reads here. I believe that's from Lamrim Chitmo. What that means is transcending the problems and pain and learning to endure, welcome, practice with our suffering in life. The conditions of life, things that come up, not brought about by a person, but like a pandemic. And the third type is enduring difficulties encountered in Dharma practice. So that's having the fortitude or to practice the Dharma. So the main idea, as I said before, patience or fortitude acts as an antidote because it views the situation from a different perspective. So that means rather than seeing the person who harmed us as the principal cause of our pain, we recognize that our own afflictions and our own negative actions, our own karma, are the real source of the pain. Then instead of harming other people and putting a lot of energy into blaming and scheming and hating and talking about them and whatever we do, we put more energy into overcoming our afflictions and purifying our negative actions. And we open a perspective. It's like when people are harming us, by and large, why? Because they're unhappy. Happy people don't go out and hurt people. As Venerable often says, you don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, today I'm going to go out and hurt some people. Yeah, I see you roll your eyes. Some people might, right? That's exactly what you thought. Well, I have to think about that. Why would they have that thought? Because they are suffering. That's a painful mind. And so we can begin to see that that's what's causing people to act in ways that harm others. We can see that they are deeply suffering and they are creating the causes for more suffering, and that generates our compassion. And if we truly understand this, Venerable says, we can stop being preoccupied with our own situation and consider the unhappiness of those who harm us. I mean, we know. Have you ever in your life had the experience of being completely overwhelmed by your afflictions? Anger takes over. Out of your mouth it comes. You have certain training, here comes the fist. I've decked a few guys in my life. It happens. So if it, and it wasn't because I planned to. It was just my response to what was happening to me, right? Oh, it hurts even to do it now. But it's done. So if we get overwhelmed by our afflictions, so do you, 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 so do we all. I know how that feels. I know what that's like. And what I hope, of course, is that people will recognize that I'm out of control and not hate me for what I just did. Well, other people have that same wish. So I want to emphasize here that having fortitude doesn't mean that we're passive or cowardly or we just let other people do whatever they want to do with us. I mean, that's not wise. But we need to have a clear mind with how we're going to deal with things. And if a mind that is clouded with anger is not a clear mind. Then the second type, the patience to transcend problems, enables us to transform any painful situations, like sickness, like poverty, like any of the troubles arising from our present situation, the practices for these troubled times, and turn it into Dharma practice. If we use it in that way, then experiencing difficulties helps us grow our compassion. It takes a whack at our pride. We can overcome that, or our what's Venerable's term for it these days? Pride or, no, not conceit, the other word. Arrogance. Arrogance. So things like, some examples. When we're sick, we can rejoice and see it as a chance to purify rather than getting all bummed out and angry at ourselves and our body. When we're depressed or the mind is overwhelmed with some affliction, we can rejoice and see that this is a chance to develop compassion. Write this down. Depression. Rejoice. This is overwhelming. This negativity in helping us to develop compassion. And if we train ourselves to look at it properly, every single situation we encounter through the day then becomes an opportunity to practice. Because we have a goal. We have a reason to do this. This is something very important that also Geshe Sopo is a wonderful teacher. He taught on Fortitude here. Very powerful teaching. It stayed with me all these years. He said, spiritual suffering is enduring the hardships for the purpose of attaining liberation. So that's good enough. But fortitude is actually taking and joyfully accepting those to become Buddha. If we know the goal, if we have the right reason, then we'll want to do this. He said, without the goal, there's no reason to do it. If we don't have the goal, then don't bother. Stay miserable, fine. He didn't say that, that's me. But if we have this goal, even if it's for our own short-term happiness, and then we expand our aspirations to at least have a good rebirth, or we expand them even further to seek liberation for ourselves, and or we look around and see that we're all in this boat together. How can I possibly leave these people behind? I can't. Then I will become Buddha. And that's a really good reason to transform this adversity in the past. Don't waste time. Because if I'm waiting around for the perfect situations to practice, it's going to take a very, very, very long time. So use it now. So Togme Sangpo tells us then how to just transform these distressing events of difficulties, wealth and ruin, and the hated and the desired into the path. Okay, so that's the foundation. Now let's look at these verses. Verse 12. Even if someone out of strong desire steals all your wealth or has it stolen, dedicate to him your body, possessions, and your virtue, past, present, and future. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So I thought, let's make some COVID parallels for each of these verses and see how that goes, right? So stealing is stealing. We all know what stealing is. It happens every time, any generation, every whatever. And we've all been stolen from, I'll bet you. Anybody not experienced some sort of theft? And we all probably have done a little stealing ourselves, but dare I say. But what are some parallels? Like losing, during the COVID time, losing our jobs might fall under this. Closed businesses of all kinds. Applying for government programs that were supposed to help small businesses and they never return your phone call, even. And then you read in the paper about these big corporations that got the money. I mean, come on. Evictions, people losing their homes. I mean, this is hard stuff. This isn't some theoretical, somebody stole all your wealth in 1100 AD. This is today. So this is very real. Even if someone out of strong desire steals all your wealth or has it stolen. So naturally, we would get angry. I'm not going to say naturally anymore. Reflexively, we would get angry. Reflexively, we would get discouraged. Fear arises. How am I going to deal with this? So some of the antidotes are this. So again, we're reframing how we see the situation. So not I've been ripped off, I've been cheated, I've been harmed, they've taken my stuff. What will I do? I'm going to starve. That mind. And we think, among other things, think of impermanence and death. How? The stuff was on loan to begin with. It's not going to last anyway. It's lost now, sooner than I expected. But it was going anyway. I can let it go. They're only mine for this lifetime. There's no permanent inherent mind. Mine. Let it go. Then we work on compassion. The person who took my stuff, the person who didn't process my application, the person who's throwing me out without giving me a break is also suffering, unhappy, disturbed, and they are creating really negative karma. Can we have some compassion for that? It's hard. Might be hard, but think about it. Think about what they're creating. Especially having a conviction about karma really is helpful here. But to see that they're creating some really negative karma for themselves and will suffer tremendously in the future. At the very least, I don't have to hate them. And at the best, I can have genuine compassion for their state of mind. And then we think of our own karma. So think about in this life, have I ever in this lifetime ripped somebody else off? Big or small. So you can actually feel good about paying off this karma. Because if I did it in this life, for sure it happened in the previous lives as well, right? So that's the situation where we can look at the action and go, okay, I'm not happy about it, okay? I have work to do. I'm going to have to deal with it. We're not denying this at all. But can I see this as a result of my own past actions? Accept the responsibility and deal with a clear mind and not a mind of anger. So then, what he's saying here, dedicate to him your body, possessions, and your virtue, past, present, and future. Give it all away. Now we're practicing generosity. Okay, you can have it, take it. Clearly you need it worse than I do. I let it go. I give it to you. I am actually not wanting you to have this negative karma. I'm going to give it to you. Not only am I going to give that thing, I'm going to give you everything. In my mind, I can mentally give you all my possessions. Take them all. It's okay. More will come. How do I know that? Because I have the merit from generosity. If I didn't have the merit from generosity, I wouldn't be eating, living, wearing clothes right now. Furthermore, I'm going to give you my virtue, past, present, and future. That's the generosity of giving the Dharma. So then, even just talking about it, I don't know if you can feel that, but just like you feel your heart opens. Okay, take this. Take this. It reminds me of a story. I shouldn't confess to eating lamb chops, but I wasn't always a vegetarian. But I was having a special dinner for some reason with some friends, a friend and her daughter, and she had gone out to buy these really expensive cuts of meat for this, whatever reason, don't remember why. But she had left the bag for a few minutes on the cart, and then when we got home, they were gone. And fortunately, both of us had practiced Dharma enough where we could say, well, whoever wanted these, wanted it more than we do. And the daughter was just stunned. She said, what do you mean? Why did you think that way? But we explained it. So we both had the opportunity to actually share a little bit of Dharma with this young woman who totally got it. And who knows what we had for dinner? I don't know. I don't remember that at all. Probably beans. But, and, now I can say as a vegetarian for many, 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 many years now, I can say, well, I'm glad I didn't have that piece of meat that I have to think about having harmed the body of too. So we can change our mind in response to that kind of harm. So let's go on, verse 13. This is the one that still kind of takes my breath away when we recite this once a week at the Abbey. Even if someone tries to cut off your head when you haven't done the slightest thing wrong, out of compassion, take all her misdeeds upon yourself. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. I don't know, my story is the one that's in the Venerable's book on Don't Believe Everything You Think, because I always think of Daniel Pearl, was the journalist that was beheaded by the Taliban, I think. Can't remember now the history. It's been a long time. But it was the first time that happened before it became commonplace. It was so shocking to think that a man just doing his job, just trying to tell the stories, was beheaded. In this day and age, you know, I relate that to Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, and, you know, that was a long time ago. No. To me, it's a pretty horrific, probably one of the worst horrific harms, although torture, I guess, could be worse. So even that extreme, someone tries to cut off your head when you haven't done anything. Out of compassion for that person, take all their misdeeds upon yourself. This, to me, is the far beyond the Paladin Gyatso story. And I try to imagine myself sometimes with that sword or blade at my neck. Take all their misdeeds upon yourself. Someday. Not yet, but someday. So what are our troubled times equivalents? Here's some ideas. Your boss makes you go to work right now even when you know it's not safe. You want to keep your job, you still have to go to work even though you're being exposed to the virus. Your relatives don't respect the guidelines. They're not doing distancing, they're not wearing masks, and they give you COVID. Several people have written us about this situation. It's painful. I don't know whether they've gotten infected or not, but, you know, my relatives are out just messing around. What do I do about this? So whether you've done something wrong or you haven't done something wrong, the fact is, in this case, our previous karma is ripening. So we didn't do something wrong now, but something, sometime. And we have no idea what we did, and they say we've done everything. So we know we have, if you think about it at all. So taking all their misdeeds upon ourselves, that's really the taking and giving meditation. That's taking in, okay, if I have to suffer, then may my suffering be of some purpose. May it not be useless, but may it be of some purpose. And may I be able to take on all the suffering, all the negativity, all the pain of this person who is harming me right now. Why? In order to free them, in order to make myself into a bodhisattva, into a Buddha. That's the purpose. It's not just arbitrarily taking on suffering for the fun of it. It ain't fun. But, again, through these thought training things, we take it on because it does transform our mind. It has a positive result, a very positive result. Verse 14. Even if someone broadcasts all kinds of unpleasant remarks about you throughout the 3,000 worlds, in return, with a loving mind, speak of his good qualities. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Are you getting the pattern here? They do something, we have an automatic reflexive response, and the Bodhisattva response is to do the opposite of what we think we would do. So our troubled times equivalent might be people you know, family members, start taunting you on Facebook about your political views. You write a letter to the editor, it gets published in the New York Times, and 1,000 comments slam what you said. You put your Black Lives Matter sign up in the yard and somebody comes along and slashes it. I mean, broadcasts unpleasant remarks about you throughout the 3,000 worlds. It's a public shaming, even. In return, with a loving mind, speak of his good qualities. Really? Yeah, hard, really. Venerable Children points out that our inability to do this is about our attachment to reputation. Because if we don't really care what people think about us, then you say what you say, people comment. Doesn't harm us at all. Doesn't matter if they put it on Facebook or the New York Times or CNN or the Church Bulletin, wherever. It doesn't matter. If we're not attached to our reputation, if we're not concerned about what people think about us, then who cares what they say? I used to think about that about politicians. President Obama, for example, he said a lot of stuff about him. It seemed to just, I could never be a politician. Not in this life, anyway. So we don't like it when somebody makes even a single nasty comment, even to a very small group of people, even in a stand-up meeting here at Sravasti Abbey, right? Let alone broadcast all kinds of lies that make everyone in 3,000 worlds, that's a big spread. That will make people mistrust us, dislike us. So of course, the more attached we are to our reputation, the more upset we become when other people don't agree with how we think or how wonderful we think we are or whatever. So this attachment to reputation then brings about huge anger when our happiness or expectation is thwarted. And this becomes a really big problem for us. So speak of the other person's good qualities. Well, again, we can remember that the other person's mind is under the control of karma and afflictions. Do we believe that? Do we believe it in the moment? It's good if people come, if we can come to that. Go, oh wow, they're overwhelmed by karma and afflictions. That's what's forcing them to act this way. And again, it's our karma ripening. Have we said harsh words to others? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I don't even have to ask the question. We have. So big surprise, they come back. I mean, that's true in the sort of interdependence of things. You say harsh words to me, I then say them back to you, and back and forth we go, and we both create terrible negative karma together. How fun. But even I didn't say this to you in this life, and yet that's what's being said, then past life karma is ripening. We have criticized, blamed, insulted, said many harsh words in the past. And so, this practice of speaking of the good qualities of others, that's a powerful practice. We've had the homework sometimes to try to say something about the good qualities of someone in their presence and behind their back. And it's good to look at how much we're actually practicing this ourselves. It's so much easier. Why? Because we're so much more habituated to looking at the faults, speaking about the faults, sharing about the faults, commiserating about the faults of others. I don't know that I've ever sat down to like a coffee klatch and commiserated about the good qualities of others. What a nice idea. We have had here sometimes where, we haven't done it in a long time, where we had to, everyone had to go around and point out good qualities of the people. It was good. So this is not only a good antidote for, in the moment, of responding to someone who's speaking badly about you, but it's a really good practice to cultivate for seeing the good qualities of living beings, and then understanding, then seeing that, then we see that living beings are quite lovable. And if we don't see living beings as lovable, then compassion is hard to arise. Sustained compassion. We might have pity for immediate suffering, but we have to see sentient beings as lovable in order to sustain compassion for the long haul. So that's what this one is about. Speak of their good qualities with a loving mind. Verse 15. Though someone may deride and speak bad words about you in a public gathering, looking on her as a spiritual teacher, bow to her with respect. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Our troubled times equivalents, some thoughts I came up with. In Spokane County, our local, not the county we live in, but right next door, the very able doctor, head of the Spokane County Regional District, has been called the Tony Fauci of Spokane. He got mysteriously fired, suddenly fired. They're still trying to investigate what went on. There's all kinds of rumors about it, but it's not necessarily a science-believing, mask-appreciating, limits-appreciating people necessarily are not on that health council. So you protest the public hearing. And then people in the Spokane paper denounce you for speaking up for this guy. So that's an equivalent, something like that. You speak up for what you think is right. And then someone may deride you and speak bad words about you in a public gathering. Or we go to the smelter hearing. You speak for your views, and the people on the other side might speak very badly about you, deride you in a public gathering. So instead, according to our text here, from your heart, speak of the good qualities of this person and see them as your spiritual teacher. Now, how are they a spiritual teacher? Somebody tell me.
As we heard the other night when talking about spiritual mentors, it is the job of the spiritual mentor to point out your faults.
That's right. That's right. They're pointing out faults. We may or may not have them, but we have a chance to examine them. Geshe Jampatek, we should consider their actions as beneficial. Sometimes we cannot recognize our faults as faults. We may even think we are wonderful because of them. Ever noticed sometimes? That's a painful discovery. Oh, this quality I really treasured in myself. Oh, that's a fault, darling. In this case, if someone points out our faults in front of a large group of people, he says, it may be unpleasant at times to hear, but in the long term, it is very helpful to us. Further, when we have this experience, this person is also teaching us the uselessness of attachment to praise and aversion to blame. The more attached we are to praise and approval, the more painful it is when somebody publicly points out our faults or disagrees with us, or even hints that it might not be okay what we just said. I mean, we can get pretty offended over a pretty mild affront. So Venerable says she's educating us about our vanity trying to impress people. The other thing, this was something Geshe Jampatek said, to avoid becoming angry when we're criticized or blamed, we can also think not everybody on the planet criticizes us. Did you ever notice when you go through the day, people appreciate you for washing dishes, people appreciate you for making lunch, people appreciate you for this, after this, thank you for showing up, thank you for doing this, but one person says the noodles were undercooked. And you dwell on it all day long. Who do they think they are? I like them al dente. What's wrong with that? Don't they recognize that they should be al dente? What kind of slob are they? They don't have the sophistication that I have because I eat noodles. I mean, blah, 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 blah. That one thing is what we latch onto and just stress about. Having an angry mind, creating more negative karma. When in fact, this is really lovely. There's only one person that criticized me today out of all these other people. There are people who have nice things to say about us too. So we don't need to get angry and offended by what this person says. And of course, Venerable would say, on the other hand, not everybody on the planet is saying nice things about us either. Therefore, keep an even mind about all this. Verse 16. Even if a person for whom you've cared like your own child regards you as an enemy, cherish him specially like a mother does her child who is stricken by sickness. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Troubled times equivalent. Here's a possibility. You bring your adult child back home after he lost his job. You feed him. You're doing his laundry again. He's taken over your house, wants no part of you, and makes your life miserable. I've heard a few of these stories too. It's painful and it's unfortunate. This is also, guess what? Karma. Karma. This is a result, again, of our own past actions. We did something else similar to somebody in the past. We turned on a person who was kind to us. We criticized a person. We hurt their feelings. We betrayed their trust. Think for a minute. Have you ever done that in this life? Yeah, I imagine most of us could probably come up with an example. And in fact, parents might be right there on the list. Somehow, sometime, some way. So of course, if we're looking at our past actions, result of right creating karma, now it's happening to us. And again, sentient beings' minds are under the influence of afflictions. So when we've done that in the past, were we thinking clearly? No. When we've done that in our past, was compassion and love alive in our mind? Were we thinking of all beings? No. Our self-centered thought was totally raging. And that's what we did. So that's what the other people are doing too. If we regard the person who betrays our trust in the way a mother or father would regard their child who is stricken by illness, we won't take what they're saying and doing personally. We know they're not in their right mind. What is this person sick with? Venerable says, their mental afflictions. So those two ways of changing how we think. We've done this in the past, and this person is under the influence of afflictions. I don't have to take this personally. Set your limits as you need, but we don't have to be angry. We can still do it with a loving mind. 17, if an equal or inferior person disparages you out of pride, place her where you would your spiritual teacher with respect on the crown of your head. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So one teaching talks about this as knocking down our pride when someone is competing with us. But I'm going to risk pushing this a little bit further, and Guess You Jump a Tech Truck kind of goes there. In the troubled times equivalent, any time that we're harassed or discriminated against on the basis of differentness, I think this falls under the same thing. If an equal or inferior or any person disparages you out of pride or out of hatred or out of ignorance, place her as you would your spiritual teacher on the crown of your head. So if we look at the new rise in anti-Semitism, the threat to the LGBTQ community, racial violence, police violence, even the Wall Street Journal telling Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady in Waiting, to drop the doctor from her title. believe that. Hey kiddo, drop the doctor. Place her as you would your spiritual teacher with respect on the crown of your head, not Jill Biden, the writer of the editorial. Geshe Japatek, this person says, this person is harming us in a weakened state of mind. They're under the control of their disturbing attitudes. Clearly, if they had a strong positive mind, they wouldn't act that way. So there are 4 points that Mahayana practitioners try to follow. If someone scolds us, we should not scold or speak harshly in return. If someone criticizes us or points out our faults, whether we have them or not, we should not criticize back. If someone hits us, we should not strike back. And if someone gets angry with us, we should not get angry back. Instead, place them as a spiritual teacher on the crown of your head. Now, what does this mean? Venerable Chögyam says that placing our spiritual teacher on the crown of our head is really quite a very valuable practice. So it's imagining your spiritual teacher in the form of the Buddha or Chenrezig or somebody above you, above your head all the time. When we do our prayers, then we're supplicating our teacher. When we do our dedications and so forth, we offer to the Buddha on the crown of our head. So it makes you feel very close to your spiritual teacher because they're always like there if you hold that. So here, this remedy, place her as you would your spiritual teacher with respect on your crown of your head, is like the previous verse. Looking on your spiritual teacher, bow with respect. So we're acknowledging that these people who are saying nasty things about us, who are criticizing us, who are attacking us verbally, are teaching us. They're teaching us to overcome our anger. They're teaching us to look at our faults. They're teaching us to cultivate love and compassion. If we view every being that we encounter as a teacher, I've practiced this off and on. I can't say it's a steady practice, but it's something I was introduced to a long time ago, and it really helps to diminish the pride and helps to open our mind to being receptive to learning from everyone, including those who harm. 2 more. Though you lack what you need and are constantly disparaged, afflicted by dangerous sickness and spirits, without discouragement take on the misdeeds and the pain of all living beings. I mean, this sums up all the suffering you can imagine, right? Troubled times, food insecurity, rent insecurity, childcare insecurity, homeschooling when you never meant to, living in isolation, having no close friends, afflicted by dangerous sickness, and even spirits that you can't even see. Venerable says, imagine losing almost everything in your life. In the same way, we can react to misfortune with anger or upset and wanting to strike back at society. We can get depressed and feel paralyzed and helpless. And Venerable says, check. This is hard when you feel like everything has been taken away. But check behind that. The self-centered thought has this feeling of being entitled. I should have this. The world should not be this way. I should not have to have this experience. And I know when I start hearing should inside myself, I am projecting, somebody's crossed my rules of the universe, and I am projecting things that aren't actually reality. So again, rather than blame our people, other people, or ourselves, we point to the self-centered mind and the results of our own karma and our ripening. We can rejoice. We can rejoice. This karma is finished. And if I don't react in a way that makes me harm others or lash out, then I'm creating some virtue. So this does not mean, again, this does not mean we're criticizing ourselves, we're hating ourselves. Self-centeredness is not who we are, it's just a thought. It's a false one, and it is not a part of our nature of our mind. Our mind is pure. So this too we need to cultivate. So what this is saying too, this verse, without discouragement, take on the misdeeds and the pain of all living beings. This is really the taking and giving meditation. Taking on that suffering, letting it transform everything that might have caused me to behave negatively in the past. Explode that self-centered thought and let the light of my love and compassion fill, and I give it to everybody. It makes a huge difference to do this. Although, do not do it when you're discouraged. That's what it says, without discouragement. But as Venerable pointed out, in practice, when we feel very discouraged and we're in the middle of our own kind of self-pity, if I may call it that, in response to our suffering, then doing the taking and giving meditation, that's not the time to do that. Do something that brightens your mind. Think about my precious human life. Think about everything I have going for me. Thinking about my own good qualities. Thinking about the kindness I've experienced in my life. You know, those kinds of meditations that uplift us. And then when the mind is a little more lifted, that's the time when we can do the taking and giving meditation, because we have some resource ourselves. And then we can take on, imagining taking on that suffering. Again, it's not literal, but imagining doing it and giving away all of this light and all of this, giving away our body, giving away everything so that everybody can be happy, extremely uplifting and helps us develop love and compassion, which progresses along the path. That is the purpose. Finally, though you become famous and many bow to you and you gain riches equal to Vajravana, see that worldly fortune is without essence and be unconceited. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So this is kind of a category on its own. It's a little bit out of the thought training, maybe. And we'd love to have this problem, right? You become famous, many bow to you, you gain riches. I Googled celebrity suicides in 2020. The list is very long. The list of celebrity suicides, I don't know how, of all time, I don't know, in fact, like the last 20 years. I didn't even look at it, it was so long. Or overdose deaths. Think Prince, think Whitney Houston. Oh, Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain. I mean, really. Become famous and many bow to you and you gain riches equal to Vajravana. Vajravana is a deity of... riches equal to, it means your wealth is equal to that of one of the deities of wealth. In other words, you're richer than Jeff Bezos or Donald Trump. Whatever. See that worldly fortune is without essence and be unconceited. So in the same way, we have this wealth because we created the karma to have it. If we care about others in society, we'll share it. We know that it's a temporary ownership. We're not going to be here forever. So to share it and not be conceited about it. And in this way, we take this fortune. It's good for our own mind, and we can bring a lot of benefit to a lot of other beings. And then we can use it to create merit for our own future. If we do take all that fame and all that possessions and all of that glory and use it to harm others, or use it simply to try to get ourselves more and more pleasurable happiness, then the results are so painful, so horrible, now and in the future. So I want to close with a reminder that these are practices that we train to. Do not beat yourself up if today someone says an unkind remark to you and you respond with too quickly. Let's put it that way. But notice, and then go to the cushion and reflect. What's another way I could have handled this? What's another way I could see this through the teachings of the Dharma that would make my response be different? And The great sage Shantideva, in his guide to a Bodhisattva's way of life, tells us there is nothing whatsoever that does not get easier through familiarization. Small harms, we practice with small harms, then large harms become easier. Familiarizing ourselves again, remembering karma, remembering that anger is not our friend, remembering fortitude, love and compassion are what we're trying to cultivate, and remembering our goal. We're doing this for the purpose to be able to be of benefit to all living beings.